Pick up the audio from the camera, but then add video capture device. Device 2. And it's showing this, but then for some reason it's not coming up in here. There's a video. Camera. What I can do is yeah, that was another person walking with Ollie downstairs to let me know when it starts to work. So, alright, let's try the USB card there. Okay, so still. Yeah, funny thing is, it says pick up the audio, so all of the audio there is coming from the camera there. Yeah, but I'm trying to wonder if is it because it's not. Anyway, let me put up the slides first. More important at the moment. Screen 2. How do I get to hold it? Anyway, so how to be honest, as long as it puts up the audio, it's alright. What's more important is the actual slides and then the audio, because usually I have, at the start it's good to have a shot of the room, but I'll do this now. It's always when I'm in a rush, and then it always sends codes to my phone. Oh, didn't do a code to my phone this time. Alright.
As long as you've got your slides and the audio.
Yeah, because it'll be like a kind of podcast in a sense, because what we usually would do is we'd have in like a small section here, shots of the room, and then the slides take the main points. Obviously, like they talk about the slides. Yeah. So I mean, to be honest, I don't know why the video worked. I hate it because it's literally worked since today, and then today decides not to work with me. But anyway, so to save these, but as images, so JPEG, save all slides. Okay. So then to here. And then presentation, add image slideshow. Now the issue is here, slides, make sure it's manual, and not automatically, otherwise it will automatically change it.
Yeah.
But then here, image files, you have to add them
One by one.
one by one in the order that you'd like. So like here, I don't know why they're not. I think it's. I don't know if it's done by size or whatever, or if I can sort them by name. Well, actually, let me try this. See if I can sort it by name. I've never tried to do this, but if I sort it by name, well, before 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Oh well, save us out about 20 minutes. Like before, I used to there's one, there's two, making sure that I do it by because I think before it was sorted by size and stuff.
Yeah.
Okay, so here we have this, right? Now with me to the microphone, but obviously the microphone, so you can see. Now it was always good to make sure that now we're here talking quite loud. It's because otherwise it's
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, let's take seats. I'll be back 10 minutes before. Eventually. Thank you. Okay, good morning everyone. And just make sure you can hear us okay at the back. Yeah, brilliant. It's okay. If you couldn't, you want to respond to the questions. There you go. Anyway, right. Good morning. Welcome to Q4 quarterly economic briefing. Those of you that don't know, my name is Chris Fletcher. I'm the policy director here at Great Capacity Chamber of Commerce. It's great to see so many people here today at this time of year for this event. It's traditionally our last event of the year that we run at the Chamber, and today is no exception. And I'm really pleased today as well to welcome Chris Jackson, the MD of Transparent Express, who have supported today's event, who will be joining us later for the panel discussion around some of the issues that we'll hear in a minute from Subrah, but also other stuff that's going on in the economy at the present moment in time, which is quite interesting. I think it's probably one way to describe it. Other people will perhaps describe it as quite challenging as well, and you've got a real mix of stuff going on. You've got all sorts of white papers coming out recently, Get Britain Working, devolution white paper, you've got the industrial strategy, you've got the budget, which I think we'll probably mention some of that today. Yeah, okay. So we've got the budget as well, so there's all sorts of things going on at present. And really it's a landscape that probably we've not been used to dealing with for a number of years, and that's not a political comment about the previous government or anything like that. It's just a fact. We've had years and years of not a lot happening, a lot of talk going on, but very little actually coming out by way of change. At the present moment in time, we are facing change, it feels like, on a daily basis, in one thing and another, but we'll get into that in a minute. So today, I'm going to welcome you to now. I'm going to do a Q&A presentation in a minute. I'll Subrah to pick up there. And then we've got our panel discussion. That's Chris Jackson from Transparent Express. We've got our own Susanna Cordova, head of international trade. International trade is always an issue that comes up time and time again at these event handlers as well. We've seen some more stuff around that in the press recently. We'll give Subrah a bit of a break after his Q&A presentation, but he will be part of that panel. And then we'll ask questions and throw it open to yourselves as well. And anything you want to ask any of our panelists or points of clarification. But without any further ado, I'm going to hand over to Subrah to lead us through the main part of today's event. So Subrah, over to you.
Thank you, Chris. Good morning, everyone. Hopefully everyone can hear me okay. I'm still recording from a winter bus, so if I keep clearing my phone occasionally, I will ask for your apologies in advance. So, thank you, Chris, for that, and it's great to have so many of you here to attend the QBS briefing. So some of you have attended the QBS briefings before, but I know there are some people who are attending this for the first time. So what is the QBS? The Quarterly Economic Survey is what we do in Greater Manchester. It's part of the UK's largest business confidence, business sentiment survey. It's a national survey. Chambers of Commerce administer it in their local areas. So we do it for Greater Manchester, the results of which I will be presenting this morning. But GMCC also coordinates the responses for the wider Northwest. So the other chambers in the Northwest send us their results. We prepare the Northwest results, send it off to the DCC. DCC prepares the national results. And the QES results are used by policymakers. It's actually a fairly robust survey. It has been going on for 35 years now. It's used by policymakers in Treasury, the Bank of England. It's one of the inputs that goes into the Monetary Policy Committee. So they will probably be looking at the Q3 results because that's all we have at the national level. And the other interesting thing that we do here in GM is we do the field work, we do the analysis, and we publish the results all in the same quarter. So this is, intelligence from this quarter, the quarter that is due to end in about 2 weeks' time. And another thing to mention is the Greater Manchester Index. So that's a composite economic indicator that we have developed here. It's based on 7 different QES measures. It is one number. It gives you an indication of where the Greater Manchester economy is at any one quarter in time. So it's a good way to track, an improvement in economic activity or a decline in economic activity, as the case might be. We also presented it to the Greater Manchester Combined Authority, who use it as part of their own decision making. And just one more thing, when there are these different charts, and if you have seen the presentation before, you know that it's chart heavy by choice. Those numbers are all balances. So it is the difference between the proportion of positive responses to a question and the proportion of negative responses to a question. So when the balance is above zero, it means that there are more positive responses than negative responses, and in some cases the balances are below zero, and in which case it means that more businesses said things are actually being bad in this quarter. So that's just for context. But before I get on to this quarter, just a quick recap of where we were in September. So the Q3 results. Now Q3 actually showed a decline in economic activity in Greater Manchester and indeed the wider Northwest and the UK. The Greater Manchester Index, which was at 30 points in Q2, actually declined. And if you think about the context in Q2, the field work for the QES and the presentation was actually in the lead up to the general election. In fact, I think the presentation was exactly a week before the general election. So there was this general perception and optimism that the new government will come into place and they will pursue a different economic direction. So I think that contributed to an increased economic activity in Q2. So the Greater Manchester Index went up to 30.3. It then went down in Q2, and then Q3 there was a decline. So it was 18.3 in Q3. There was a noticeable sharp decline in some measures. International trade, manufacturing, those were some of the sectors and the activity levels which have dipped. And of course, consumer confidence also dipped in Q3. We'll look at all of those measures. But what has happened since September? Chris mentioned some of these. We have had a slew of publications from government, industrial strategy, all of the things that Chris mentioned. And of course, we had the budget as well. And I think it is fair to say that the budget did not receive the vote of confidence that the chancellor might have expected it to receive. So we had even more bad news, didn't we? So these are some headlines that I have picked up, mostly from the Financial Times, but also from other publications. Just in the last sort of 8 to 10 weeks, there was concern about inflation because as the US elections and Trump winning, there is fear that there will be tariffs and economic sanctions on other countries, which might increase inflation. It might actually put more barriers to international trade. So there are some concerns around there, the largest economy in the world. And we had 2 consecutive months in which GDP declined. So we have 0.1% decline in September and a 0.1% decline in October. And so in the 3 months between August and October, the UK economy grew by only 0.1%. But much of it was in the month of August. Okay? So we had 2 months of decline. There are concerns around inflation, and in fact, the data from this morning, inflation went up to 2.6%. It was 1.7, then it was 2.3, now it's 2.6. And that's more or less on target based on the data that came out yesterday, right? Because we still have concerns around wage inflation, which is a primary source of inflationary pressures at the moment. And then, of course, there was the budget. So manufacturing confidence slumped after the budget because of national insurance rises, national living wage, national minimum wage, all of which issues we will look into in some detail this morning. So the overall picture was much higher quantum of business taxation, particularly around employment, and so that's going to have a negative impact on the economy. And the latest private surveys around recruitment, including the QES, actually shows a slightly declining trend in recruitment. And the number of vacancies has actually gone down again, and it's now more or less on par with the end of 2019. Okay? So it's the pre-COVID levels, and you might remember after COVID we had a historic high in the number of vacancies at 1.35 million. That has actually gone down. So it's creeping towards those pre-pandemic levels. So that's the context For the field work, for the QES, so what would you expect? You would expect even more bad news. But actually, there are nuances there, and that's what I really want to focus on this morning. Now, based on the budget and the fact that employment taxation particularly has gone up, and employers are looking at a much higher expense in terms of operational costs come April, business confidence has suffered. So this is this is data from this quarter's economic survey. And as you know, I break the data down by the three sector groups of services. So all services is in one group. That's the black line there. The green line is manufacturing, and then the blue line is construction. So I will group it. And across all three sectors, fewer businesses in this quarter relative to the previous are optimistic that they can actually maintain their turnover. No surprises there because of much higher levels of taxation and the dip in consumer confidence, right, which we have seen in both September and October. And when it comes to profitability, it's a similar situation for construction and services. Manufacturing has dipped very slightly, but that could also be reflective of the fact that prices might need to go up very soon because the cost of operations are going up. Okay, so the overall economic context and the fact that business confidence has actually dipped, that's clear. However, the rest of the QS measures are actually quite mixed, right? So why is that? We'll look into it. The first thing to mention, of course, is the Greater Manchester Index. So in the previous quarter, the Greater Manchester Index was at 18.3. It has actually gone up this quarter to 27. Okay? And that is against all of the economic indicators for the UK that we have seen so far. And we will look into the component parts as well to understand why that is. The expectation is that although we have 2 consecutive months of economic contraction, the UK economy will still continue to grow, but it will be feeble growth, so there won't be the substantial amounts of growth that the Chancellor is expecting, or indeed wants. So we have seen an improvement in this quarter for both domestic and international demand. Okay. There might be seasonal issues here, there might be data issues here, but it is what it is. And these, ladies and gentlemen, remember, these are the responses that you as business leaders and business owners have given us, right? So this is your data, and you have told us, or more of you have told us, that things are actually looking better in this quarter than those of you have told us that things are looking worse. In Q3, so that's July, August, September, the UK economy did grow, actually grew by 0.4%, so that's actually looking a lot better compared to what we are experiencing at the moment. And then the purchase managers indices, the Standard & Poor indices, also show a very mixed picture for the different sectors. So that's the data for November, which they published in December earlier this month. So services is up slightly, so it's still positive. So the PMI indices, any number of 50 or above indicates growth, and it's only manufacturing that's actually looking weak at that point of time. But that's national data rather than Greater Manchester data. So we did have that contraction, and yet we have seen the improvement in Greater Manchester, which actually is quite interesting, and actually it might be indicative of some other economic underlying trends which are doing much better. But we'll get to that. So what's the picture for demand? So domestic demand, overseas demand, so this is for Greater Manchester as a whole, rather than being split into sectors or sub-regions. And the picture is quite clear. Both domestic sales across the city region and domestic orders have actually gone up in this quarter. Okay. And by some quarter, actually, in the case of services, but also manufacturing is actually showing a slightly improved trend. Overseas demand, so this is international trade, and I'm sure Susanna will pick this up, has been very volatile in the last few quarters. Okay. But despite that volatility, or maybe in line and in trend with that volatility, we have seen one quarter down, next quarter up, one quarter down, next quarter up. And that's pretty much been the scenario for several quarters now, over the last 2 years. Okay. Nonetheless, I think we've got to take it for what it is. In the latest quarter, international trade, NGN is looking up slightly. So that's good news. So let's look at the situation by sector. So this is the same demand data, just domestic demand, split into the three sector groups: manufacturing, services, and construction. Manufacturing is worth noting because we have seen those huge swings in manufacturing as well. So in Q3, so in 2023 Q4, actually it was just around zero. It went straight down in Q1. The optimism in Q2 boosted it, came crashing down in Q3, and then has gone up slightly. But the good news, I think, for manufacturing is that it is above this zero line. Okay, so a higher proportion of manufacturing businesses in this quarter are telling us that things are looking slightly better. Now that could be seasonal because of festive demand, there's slightly more production to actually cater to things here. And of course, if we look at manufacturing in the Greater Manchester region, there is obviously a lot of chemicals, machinery, etc. that is exported, but there is also food manufacturing. And so it will be interesting to compare that with retail sales, and when we get the retail sales data, to actually see whether expenditure on food in the retail sales data has actually increased. So that's something we can do later. Okay. But it's also a similar trend for services and construction as well. So services has now had 4 quarters of improvements. So all the way from the beginning of this year, services has actually been going up. Very important for the UK, but also very important for GM, because across the city region, I think it's about 83–84% of the economy is actually made up of services. Manufacturing and construction are significant, but services forms the bulk of the economy. So the improvement in services, especially B2C services, would be interesting. And this is where I think there are lots of contradictions in some of the national data that we are getting. We are seeing consumer confidence go down slightly, but we have also seen a huge increase in spend on hospitality. Right? So retail sales necessarily have not gone up, and indeed retail sales actually dipped in November. Well, that's the expectation. We don't have the national data yet. But the fact that we have these different indicators actually telling us slightly different pictures and presenting us slightly different stories is actually quite interesting. And as an economist, as a data geek, actually this is gold. Okay. So that's the data with domestic sales. Domestic orders also showing an improvement. So construction is just about at zero. Manufacturing is at zero, but that's a slight improvement from the previous quarter. And then services has again had that improvement. So all the way from Q1 up until now, there has been an improvement in services. So it looks like order books aren't too bad at the moment, but whether they actually materialize into economic activity in the next quarter is what we need to see. So what's the national data telling us then? So that's the GM data in the previous slide. That's from the QES. This is national data from the Office for National Statistics. We have data for until October. Now, manufacturing, again, you can see the volatility in manufacturing. So roughly every 3 to 4 months, things have gone up, and then they have gone down. So that pattern of volatility actually matches what we are seeing in the Greater Manchester QES. And this is why I emphasize the importance of the QES, and also the importance of why all of you, if you haven't filled in the QES, you should fill in the QES, is because it gives us extremely reliable data. Now, this national data is actually months behind the QES, right? So we have presenting Q4 data. This is only going on to October 2024, right? So we are actually at least about 2 months ahead of some of the national data. So these are just the first estimates. So manufacturing is showing that volatile pattern. Construction generally tends to be volatile. You see huge ups and then huge downs because of the way the pipeline sometimes works. We have cancelled what might be the very long-term pipeline in terms of big infrastructure projects. So we are seeing some infrastructure projects, but then HS2 had a significant impact, as you know, cancelled. But we still have other projects going on. So construction is again coming along. The balance is about 100. So these are index numbers from the ONS. Anything above 100 is good. Anything below 100 indicates a contraction. So manufacturing has consistently been slightly below that 100 line. But the really interesting thing is that stability in services. Right? So since April, which is where the slide starts, but even before April, services has been about a market mark. Yes, from one month to the next, we may have seen slight changes, slight decline, slight improvements, but overall, services is actually fairly stable. Yes, it could be much higher, but the fact that it is stable and the fact that that sector contributes well over 80% of the UK economy is good news. It's both B2C and B2B services. Now, of course, within services is included all of the retail sales data. And this is quite interesting. And what has happened, of course, is the consumer confidence issue has had a direct impact on retail sales. So there are two lines that you will see. The black line is the value, so it's what we pay, and the green line is the volume. It's actually what we consume. So one thing, quite easy to conclude, actually value is significantly higher from volume, effect of inflation, so prices of pretty much everything has gone up. So we are paying much higher prices now. And we are consuming less. So if we compare this data with the previous years, actually the volume of retail sales has always been below 100. But the value is near 108. So we are actually paying much higher prices, but compared to in a year or 2 years ago, we are actually consuming less, paying more for less. Right? That's the effect of inflation. But then, if you look at the data for between August, September, and October, so this is election time. So since May, there was an improvement, again, expectation of new direction of travel from government, improved consumer confidence. So generally and you also have the summer season, holidays, hospitality, all of that, spend goes up. But as soon as the Prime Minister and the Chancellor set the mood music about black hole, tough decisions to come, tightening the belts in the budget, they were also indicating that austerity also helped, although that did not materialize. Actually, consumer confidence dipped, and so did our consumption levels. But prices may have still gone up until about September, and you see the effects of discounting there, but we are consuming less. And this is why behavior is extremely important. And it's a good lesson for us in the UK. Yes, there may be tough decisions coming, and yes, you may not necessarily be able to insulate the economy from the impact of those tough decisions, but if for a prolonged period of time, from very senior figures in government, if the mood music is all about tough decisions, higher taxation, consumer confidence will dip, business confidence will dip, and we will impact the economy in a negative way as well, right? So behavior is extremely important. It's not just the statements, but it's also how we react as consumers. So that's on retail sales. So let's look at international trade now. So export sales, extremely volatile, but so is export orders. From one quarter to the other, there are huge swings in manufacturing and services actually behaving in different ways as well. But on services, the important point is, since Q1, we have actually seen improvements. So service exports are going up from Greater Manchester, certainly. The export of goods, which is what the manufacturing line depicts, is the one that is volatile. Okay? So we saw that improvement in Q2, down in Q3, and then again up in Q4. And so slightly similar picture with orders. But the good news is international trade is doing okay. Now, I have broken the data down, again for the national data. So this is UK's international trade. The previous slide was Greater Manchester's international trade. So we've got imports and exports. So this blue line here is exports of goods, and this is our service exports. So what we can see is that services is steadily creeping up, right? That matches the Greater Manchester QES data as well. So in this year, we have actually seen service exports grow. Not by huge quantum, and again, you can see that from the volatility in international trade, but generally, we have actually seen slight improvements in service exports. But when it comes to goods exports, that's where you do see some challenges. So from a number of it's billions, so from about 100 billion, it has actually come down. There has been a slight improvement between Q2 and Q3, but it's marginal. Exports, on the other hand, again, much higher than our imports, so we do have a deficit so far as international trade is concerned. Our exports are much higher, and the currency value also does have an impact on this, just to mention that. Now, the other interesting thing, of course, is in addition to looking at the overall exports of goods and services, we can actually look at the trade with the EU. And we can also look at the trade with non-EU, but I have not necessarily presented that in the chart to this morning. So EU exports and EU imports. Really interesting trends there since Brexit. Now, you may have heard government ministers from the previous government particularly saying, oh, Brexit has not had an impact, actually UK's international trade has grown. Overall, yes, because imports could go up. So if you look at the overall quota of international trade, yes. But even exports, there were quarterly fluctuations, there were monthly fluctuations, and that's what they have really picked up. But actually, the long-term trend since 2023 Q1 is that our EU exports have slightly declined and then they started to stabilize. With imports, again, there was some stability more or less. It's hovering between that 70 and 80 billion in a quarter, and then there has been a slight decline. So that's one part of the story, right? You can look at these quarterly fluctuations.
No, carry on.
Now, so far as trade with the EU is concerned, it's Brexit that has had the most impact. And our exports to EU has actually declined by about 3.5%. So the long-term trend from pre-Brexit to now is that our exports have actually slightly declined. There is a study that the London School of Economics published this morning, and actually lists out some of these impacts as well. And we know from the data that Susanna's team processes on international trade documentation that many exporters, especially the smaller ones, actually gave up after Brexit. Now, of course, there was the combined impact of Brexit and COVID at that time, so there were huge international trade barriers. But businesses gave up because the paperwork became way too complex. And if it's a small business, without a dedicated team to just handling all the compliance requirements and the paperwork requirements, it's actually a lot easier to give up on international trade and focus on the domestic market instead. And that's exactly what businesses did. And I think our estimate is that it's roughly 1,300 businesses or so across the Northwest, 16,500 across the UK. So 16,500 businesses have actually given up exporting the EU after Brexit. Right? So then, the question to ask policymakers is, how does that square with this ambition to let's export all the way into economic growth? It's actually quite challenging. So when there are all of these different barriers, and of course the process of importing and exporting actually becomes much harder, then the larger businesses might do okay, and that's exactly what happened. But then you have fewer businesses actually in the market, the competition goes down, prices go up, and our imports actually go up as well. So these are fairly complex and intertwined issues, but it is well discussing the long-term impact of some of the decisions. Okay. On other economic measures, cash flow and capacity utilization, again, a slight improvement for manufacturing and the services. The good news for manufacturing is from a balance of below zero, it has actually gone up to about zero. That's good news for businesses in the manufacturing sector. Services, likewise, a fairly strong boost there from about -5 to +12. Again, good performance there. Construction is the one that was actually showing a decline, but generally that is in line with the trend. We do see that volatility in the construction sector. And likewise, capacity utilization, again, a very important economic indicator, because the more spare capacity there is in a business, actually actually the room for expansion, business investment, etc., is a lot less. So yes, our capacity utilization is hovering around that 50% mark for different sectors. But the good news is, again, there's an improvement for both manufacturing and services in this quarter. It's just construction that is showing decline. Again, there was 3 quarters of improvement in the construction sector, and it is just this quarter that's showing a slight decline. So cash flow and capacity utilization, again, good news so far as manufacturing and construction. Manufacturing and services are concerned, with the exception of now, of course, the concerns in the last few days has been around inflation. Right? And we do have the latest data from today, but this is QES data, and this is actually quite important. There are 2 things here. One is, what are the sources of pressure on businesses generally? And in more specific terms, what are the price pressures? Okay. So if we look at the general business pressures, focus on the green line for a moment at the top. That's inflation. Okay? It's actually, lots of businesses actually saying inflation is their number 1 concern. Now, can we actually explain that? And I think there's a very good explanation for it. So we're going to have further increases in pay, probably higher levels of disposable income, more consumer spending, slightly higher levels of inflation, right? And that puts a vicious cycle of pressure on businesses because they have to raise prices because of pay rises and other inputs actually going up. When your currency is actually quite strong, you can't necessarily export, but focus more on the domestic market and so on. So there are all of these pressures as well. So that's inflation. So inflation has consistently been the number 1 concern for businesses in Greater Manchester for a long time. That's since the end of last year. Okay. Competition is the second one. So generally businesses are concerned about competition, and of course you would be. It has dipped slightly. Actually, there are other interesting things here. Now, this dark blue line is taxation. The teal green line, I know it's not perfectly clear, I'm sorry about that, is around business rates. And then the magenta line there is around interest rates. Now, higher levels of inflation. So what do you think the Bank of England is going to do tomorrow? Will they be cutting interest rates? I should think so. So it is very highly likely that it will be maintained at 4.75%. And the expectation amongst many economists was that there will be 3 interest rate cuts in 2025, at least 3 interest rate cuts, that it might come down to, say, 4%. But I think that is now looking less likely because of the latest data that we have. Now, of course, that means financing costs are going to be higher. So if interest rates are higher, your financing costs are higher. And if businesses are borrowing or unable to borrow, then business investment also goes down. So again, there is that cycle which is actually perpetuated by some macroeconomic conditions. Business rates is a concern, especially for small businesses. We had business rates relief, etc., being offered in the immediate aftermath of COVID. Some of it is actually getting withdrawn. And of course, for hospitality businesses, the quantum of relief has actually been declined, reduced in the latest budget. So again, hospitality businesses will be looking at higher prices and higher operational costs come April. So that's on the external business pressures and what is putting pressure on businesses. But if we look specifically at prices, we have a slightly different trend in GM to what some other chambers are reporting is happening in their region. Now, utilities, it seems to be the number 1 concern in this quarter. In some quarters, it has been raw material prices. But what is different in GM is around pay settlements. So that's this magenta line here. So wage inflation is actually a factor. It is affecting many businesses, and I know I've had sort of individual discussions with some of you who actually said pay rises are actually going to be a big impact, big drag on your expansion plans, etc. in the next year, recruitment plans as well in the next year. But across the city region, it seems that there are concerns about pay settlement, so a quarter of businesses are concerned, but concerns around other price points, utilities, raw material prices for manufacturing sector, etc., those seem to be ranking slightly higher. And that is different from what's happened in some other parts of the UK. So I want to highlight that. So then, what is our outlook for inflation? So two charts here. The chart on the left is from the QES. That's the ONS data updated for this morning's inflation release. So let's look at that first. Now CPI, Consumer Price Index, is the one that everybody focuses on. That went up 1.7, 2.3, and then the latest data was 2.6%. That's 2.6% relative to the previous year. So of course, if we compare that 2 years before, then you're going to get a much higher percentage. So first thing to mention, I mentioned this in previous briefings as well. Inflation going down does not mean prices are coming down. It's just that prices are going up at a slightly lower pace. So that's one thing. But that's CPI. So the fact that CPI has gone up is indeed bad news. But countering that is something else, which is the producer price inflation. So the producer price inflation actually tracks two things. There is an input price, producer price inflation, and then there is an output price inflation. Input prices is what predominantly manufacturers pay for the goods that they are consuming. So the things that come in the factory door is what the input price inflation measures. And then the output price inflation is the price at which they are selling their goods. Both of those are actually below the zero line. So it means that relative to 12 months ago, actually the prices of raw materials has actually gone down for many quarters. And as a result, manufacturers are not necessarily increasing their prices by much higher percentages. Having said that, producer price inflation at one time, when CPI was at 11%, producer price inflation was actually at 21%. Okay? So the fact that is why you actually see that much sharper decline, because we are actually starting from a much higher base, so that reduction is actually looking much more. But between October and November, we have seen both inflation, the producer price inflation measures, actually creep up. And that's what the 2 years data show, right? So there are more businesses now concerned about inflation than there were in the previous quarter. So again, the GM data actually gives an indication of what's probably going to come in the national data set. And there is one more confirmation for that, which is the other question in the QES, where we ask businesses, do you expect to increase the prices of your goods, the selling price of your goods, in the coming months? And actually that's gone up again in this quarter. So from about balance of a third, just under 35, to actually about a third. So there are more and more businesses who are now thinking about increasing their prices because of all of the other issues that are national minimum wage that we have discussed. So more businesses expecting to increase prices. Inflation is already up slightly, CPI. And so the outlook for inflation actually going up again, or maybe staying high, is quite likely. And of course, that also means that the interest rates from the Bank of England aren't probably going to come down. Now, the impact of this, generally across the economy, is on consumer confidence and consumer spending. There are about 5 million households who have to renew their mortgages between now and 2027 end. So over the sort of roughly next 36 months, there are around 5 million houses whose mortgages will need to be renewed. Okay? Very high chance they will all be renewing their mortgages at higher interest rates. So that means less disposable income, which can then impact consumer confidence and consumer spending. So there is a very serious consequence to inflation and interest rates. Okay. These are some of the free text comments. So we have a question, an open-ended question at the end of the QES asking for comments. I think it's safe to say that the budget is not popular. So there are numerous comments about the budget, and the first one is remarkable. So it's a US-owned business which was actually planning to expand their capacity in the UK. They actually have a site in Stockport, but they are now exploring the US or Asia for expansion, right? So again, there might be some foreign direct investment decisions which might in the long term be impacted by some of the measures announced in the budget. So the budget is certainly not popular, but again, there are some comments around why, we're still in early days, first 6 months of the government, and tough decisions that we take now, and that there is optimism about the long-term trajectory for the economy. There was one comment about trade barriers coming up from the result of the US elections. So again, there was a really nice piece yesterday, I don't remember which publication it was actually looking at how China is literally pouring in billions into countries like Mexico to set up manufacturing facilities to evade some of the trade tariffs that might come up against China. So there, obviously there is the NAFTA, there is the USMC, trade agreements between the US, Canada, and Mexico, which might actually butt. Hence why Trump has his eyes on Mexico and potential trade barriers on Mexico as well. That's because of the huge amount. Usually, there are battery facilities coming up, there are car production facilities coming up, but even American companies are investing in Mexico. So it's not just the Chinese companies. So GM is sort of one of the largest car manufacturing facilities in Mexico that focus on exporting into the US coast. So clearly there are some macroeconomic concerns. I won't go through this because I've covered most of this. I just want to mention two things. The forecast for UK economic growth for this year, 2024, is between 0.7% and 1%. It has been revised down. The forecast for this quarter's growth, Q4 2024, is between 0.2 and 0.5%. Now, I just want to just one minute on what this means for Greater Manchester. We have national economic indicators, GDP data and others, which are actually showing a slightly different picture to what the Greater Manchester PDS is showing. And some of you may be wondering whether that is actually true, or whether it is accurate. It turns out, when I look at the data and compare Greater Manchester with the wider Northwest and some of the other city regions, actually Greater Manchester has been an outlier, not just for this quarter, but for several quarters. And that might mean two things. For one, actually Greater Manchester is a fairly strong performing economy relative to the wider Northwest. And I think we are pretty certain that is the case. Okay? This is the power in the Northern Powerhouse. It's a significant area, and if we look at GDP growth for Greater Manchester, actually in some years it has grown by 6%, 7%, right? Post-COVID as well. So that's one. So that Greater Manchester actually being a strongly performing economy is there. But there might be an underlying trend, something else that's going on as well, which is around the relative performance of cities and city regions, metropolitan areas, versus the suburban towns and the rural areas. And that may be a trend that we have seen. The one thing that we saw in COVID was that actually local areas got patronage, and there was actually improvement in B2C spending, etc., in local areas as opposed to people coming into Manchester. And I think that trend we have seen as the worst. You will perhaps be able to tell us in terms of the trade usage statistics and so on. But if that is the trend, then actually we do have a lot to cheer for in Greater Manchester. So this is a good, strong performing economy, but equally, if it is that the long-term winners are going to be city regions with evolved powers, with lots of economic capability, that's definitely going to be positive for us in Greater Manchester. So we stop there and hand over to Chris.
Great, thank you, Subra, for that. A lot of food for thought in that. And again, I think the point that was made at the end is particularly important because what we're seeing in Greater Manchester doesn't just happen overnight. It's decades and decades of people working together accelerated evolution, one thing or another. We've been watching what's been going on this week with the devolution white paper. A lot of that we've already done in Greater Manchester. We've got all of that, so we've got all these things we're on in parts of the country. We don't need to go through that. I'm not saying that's not important, but we've done all that. We're in a much better place. But we've got to make sure is that the momentum we've got in Greater Manchester doesn't get held up by all these other places having, you know, open warfare and civil war about who's running one thing or another. I think the state government is those that are in that position to carry on going forward, will let you go forward. And this all comes out next year when we get the integrated settlement, multi-level powers, etc. So, if we wanted to be in another part of the country or any place in the country, I think stands a pretty good reason getting through in a good state over the next few years. When you're in it here, I don't mean when Greater Manchester, and I think that is critically important. It's important we don't talk that down, it's also important we're realistic about it as well. We've got opportunities here, but we're facing some very tough headwinds coming. So we're going to let Subra rest for a few minutes and getting back on 5 seconds. What I'd like to do is invite our panelists up. So Chris Jackson, Managing Director from Trans-Pennine Express, who's supporting the event here today. I'm going to watch out. So Chris, if you want to take the seat. Yes, Susanna, Head of International Trade, who's been name-checked several times by Subra already. But I think you can see from that the importance of international trade and the impact now that Brexit is actually beginning to have on this. And if you talk to a lot of politicians, it's almost like as though it's tomorrow or it doesn't really matter. Well, it does. So we'll be digging into that. So Chris, I'm going to start with you. Obviously, one of the consistent messages we hear is around economic growth. And certainly one of the things that we support at the chair here is infrastructure and the ability to move people around the labour market and whatever. What role does that play in your thinking at TPE and how you look at its role within, obviously, Manchester, across the north of England? How important is that ability to move people around?
Well, thanks for the question, Chris. I've got to say, Subra's not a great presentation. I'd be really interested. And you didn't ask me a question about why trains haven't been on time.
That question's late.
So yeah, Transport Express, a little bit about Transport Express, 1,800 colleagues, 2,500 when it's our line supply chain. We will transport around 25 million customer journeys across the world in Scotland, so we're really important connecting people's opportunities. When we get it right, we can be a real driver for economic growth. And in fact, what we've proven through studies is that for every £1 we invest in Transport Express, it generates £4 in wider GPA. But we recognise we've come from a bit of a place where we've been headline news, which is one of the reasons why 18 months ago the Transport Express franchise was cancelled and it was brought into the public sector, which is where I've joined. Hopefully since then, performance is really improving. Our customer metrics for the customer complaints at those same levels, and of course we've got 70,000 which is providing 1,300 extra seats every day across the north. Because we're operating a stable, reliable timetable now, we're actually seeing record-breaking growth. We're now the second fastest growing operator in the UK, just after Transport for Wales, and that's 26% increase in passenger journeys year on year, which is quite phenomenal. And part of that, of course, is linked, I think, to the strength of some of these local economies, but also the fact that trust is returning in transparent. So, absolutely, we recognise the role we play, we connect people's opportunities to employment, to college, to university, but we're a big part of the wider regional economic growth. Hope that answers the question.
Yeah, no, it is important. We always say, from about 10 years in the Northern Powers was launched by the Chancellor Joe Russell at the time. We always say, it's about being able to move people around and opening up access for opportunities with that. You mentioned there about the timetable changes weekend for extra trade between Manchester and Leeds on a daily basis. What next? What's the next improvement that you plan on doing over the next 12 months, 2 years?
Well, thanks, Chris. I'm going to go back, if I can, answer that question question, you mentioned infrastructure to start with. One of the things that we were delighted about when the Chancellor, that's our pleasure meeting the Chancellor a few weeks ago when she came to Manchester, she committed to the spend for the Trans-Pennine Route upgrade. And that's a big project that's on our doorstep. Well, how many of you know and heard about Trans-Pennine Route upgrade? Oh my goodness, I think we need to do a little bit more to raise awareness of that project. That is the second biggest infrastructure programme in the UK. The largest being high school city. It's absolutely massive. It's £15 billion-ish, and the Chancellor has committed to that spend. And that will really transform, and I don't use that term loosely, it will be transformative. People like my daughter who will be able to travel to Leeds and Manchester, she chooses on clean green electric trains, with journey times around about 43 minutes. So 6 fast trains in an hour. We are buying 29 brand new trains. We've got options up to 55 more than doing the same. And that is happening on our doorstep right now. And that will really, really change things for this part of the world in the early 2030s. The way I describe it is, anyone travel across rail in London? Yeah, pretty remarkable. Consistent holders amongst the best, most reliable, and also the best customer experience. That would be our crossrail of the north. And that's why there's no more exciting place to be so that you can evaluate the being here, because we will realise the benefits of that and massive investment. If you travel between Manchester or even beyond to York, and you look out the window, you just see it looks like one gigantic building. So, what my hope is, because it is going to be a little bit disruption between now and the end of the decade, we will have 160 days per year where we'll be diverting around some part of our core routes, which means running some slightly less frequent trains on occasion. My job is to make sure we keep passengers bottoms up, train seats rather than bus seats, and keep that economic growth and support that we need whilst that big engineering programme still out.
Essentially, you mentioned about the upgrade there. I mean, you guys go back in not too distant time. The idea was to have Northern Railroad's rail, its original idea was brand new high speed, track line, new build, all the rest of it. That's not on government's to-do list at the time, so at all, which is extremely unfortunate. Do you think, looking at that and the comparison with Crossrail, do you think realistically that Trans-Pennine upgrade will be seen as that? Because Crossrail is transformation, but everybody using it doesn't offer going so like within the state of shock. Do you think realistically that will have the same impact? And if not, do you think it's because government is just going on a big sticking cost for all the trains?
That's a good question. I mean, listen, you've got to get something decent for 14, 15 million pounds, haven't you? Without that, I mean, the railway, this is one of the big challenges of the railway industry, is that we cost quite a lot. I think some of you deal with the railway industry will know that we've got skill shortages, which puts a premium on wages. So, for example, if you work in signaling and telecommunications, it's a 10% wage premium. If you work in electrification, which of course is what we're trying to do, electrify the route, it's 12% wage premium. All of the costs are going up. Just Trans-Pennine Express, inflation has cost us £6.1 billion this year. You apply that to the wider railway supply chain, you can see how that grows. So yeah, we need to make sure that we control costs, and of course key messages that Trans-Pennine is on time and on budget. Of course you can't say all the other major railway infrastructure projects in the UK, and of course we want to keep it that way. It will be transformative. Do I think we'll see things like Northern Powerhouse Rail, high speed? I think whilst there are people talking about it, maybe Hugh Merriman, the previous Transport Minister, Rail Minister, he's now chairing the Manchester to Liverpool Rail Board, so I'm going to see very invested in making that happen. Do I think that will materialise? Personally, I think it was, because I think despite the government's commitment to make sure infrastructure spend, I think enough is going into Trans-Pennine to upgrade. I think that would be sufficient for certainly medium-term growth prospects.
And do you feel now that the current government is probably going to be easier to get things done, more acceptance with things in happening than maybe previously in that role? And does it make a difference with Trans-Pennine being under government control now?
Well, certainly it puts me under a lot more pressure. I was the second person to be summoned down to see Louise Hayes, the Transport Secretary, to explain the importance of Trans-Pennine flying flag for public ownership. because of course it's very important for her at the time. I'm sure it's important for you, we're sort of not there yet. But of course, if we have public sector, which is the model that Labour want for the whole railway sector, we need to be seen to be performing strongly and delivering well. We have had some headwinds, so of course we've had the pay awards. Just to give you an indication, so every 1% that's added to the pay costs plus DP is about £1 million extra on the payroll. And of course, what we've had, granted we've improved some of it, we've had a 5%, 4%, 4% pay award with very little reform. Our trade riders and for our trade conductors, so that's added considerable amounts of cost. We are still relying on taxpayer subsidy, so we will take around 174 million in taxpayer subsidy this year. Our ambitious plan is to return to the premium in the future, but I'm really grateful that the fact we're at the right timetable, we're growing, our revenue is growing, our ridership is growing, and the increase in revenue is matching the increase in costs of subsidy for what we say we should do.
That's what she says. Christmas, so if you get one thing that would help you in your job or the rail industry or whatever, what would that be? What's the top of your Christmas list?
That's a good question. I like to think about that. I think for me, the rail industry has been in the headlines for all reasons, hasn't it? I like to think we're like one of the anomalies where there's sometimes an headlines for the right reasons. I think that as the industry moves towards a more public sector setup, because of course you've seen that, the creation of great British Railways, I'd like to see a greater level of harmony between the operation and our trade union colleagues. With the last small basket of trade unions in the rail industry, that can make it quite challenging. I've had 10 issues across my desk in the last 18 months. I've got 3 more that just landed on my desk this week. I'd like to think that with the move to public sector at the national level, we can achieve a sensible degree of harmony in industry relations, so we can move the industry away from passages, big races, to more modern practices, because we are still stuck in the 1970s in some areas. So my wish would be to develop a community society we can be much more agile and be better supported by the work. That's my Christmas wish.
You so much for that. I'll continue, obviously, head of international trade. We've seen there's a lot of expectations at the present moment in time, but it feels to be a bit of a not up to at the present moment in time. Is there a particular reason for that? I mean, you're at the front line, aren't you? You and your team are dealing with all sorts of issues and also enabling that trade to actually take place. So, what's your sense of why things are maybe beginning to turn up in the right direction?
I think this is normally, I mean, for the first time in the past 3 or 4 years, where Canada has not been having any cycle at all. This year is the first one where we're seeing that things settle, things to Brexit and COVID, where normally around this time of the year we're seeing improvements at wholesale and export orders, but it has to be with Christmas period and all that. So I think it's kind of coming back to a cycle. I think there are still pre-Brexit levels in terms of export values, especially for goods. Services is another story, it's always Subrahmaniam. But I think it has to be more about with some of the cycles that we've seen in the past. It does seem like that's what's driving the upward trend.
Okay. I mean, you talk about it quite often, talking about the impact of Brexit. Like previously, sort of this one previously to almost sort of think, oh, well, it's happening. What we need to. Do you, I mean, seeing headlines over the weekend of the CPTPP, or got that in the right order, which is a major international trade deal, and what free trade agreements being pursued. Do you feel enough is being done about to tackle some of the issues created by Brexit? Really known some about businesses that have literally washed their hands of it, so it's just too difficult. We saw a story this week that Marks and Spencer's have a warehouse just what the outcome of Brexit is.
And I think we can undermine the effort that is going to establishing new free trade agreements, but at the same time, we need to understand that the EU continues to be our largest market, and with new EU regulations and UK regulations coming into place in the next, 3-4 years, SMEs, especially those that are less than 10 employees, are going to have a very difficult time adapting to these new rules. It's not just, we're seeing a lot of informative presentations from government, but there is a lot more that SMEs need. It's a lot of more hand-holding, expert knowledge. The lack of knowledge is sometimes a bit scary, and I think that's one area where we're not seeing enough. Companies need more of that technical knowledge to be able, and most of them don't have it in-house. We're seeing it now with some EU regulations coming with deforestation, product safety regulations that are going to impact many of the, for example, e-commerce traders. And we're already being, companies contacting us because even though the regulations already being 18 months on, they're coming into place now in December or January in 2025, they don't know. And if they don't know how they will prepare, there is not enough. I think that's one area where I feel there is far more that the government could do to support businesses.
Okay. A couple of weeks ago, we had the launch in Great Manchester, wasn't it? Of the enhanced trade partnership, a new way of beginning to elevate it. I don't know if you just want to let us know a little bit about that, because this is groundbreaking stuff, isn't it? That's happening in Greater Manchester. Yeah. But it was also mentioned in the evolution white paper as a model for future strategic areas to probably what's been built in Greater Manchester to help export. So, what is the enhanced trade partnership?
It's very exciting because I think with having greater power of we, decide to use our funding here in Greater Manchester also comes with greater responsibility, especially across all the stakeholders in the region. I think we all are doing great things with the bold, authority and all this that is coming out of it. Is making sure that we're working closer together, that we're kind of linking better, and making sure that companies, ultimately, we're giving companies a more seamless export journey and support. Everybody has different specialisms, and I think I'm very excited to see that we're working closer with the Department for Business and Trade, the Combined Authority, the Growth Company. All of us are really keen to ensure that we're kind of building the pipeline of new exporters, helping them face the challenges that I just mentioned, and ultimately making sure that any new trade agreements or things that are put in place really benefit our economy. And on that thing is, we mentioned services and goods. GM exports is primarily led by services. It's not a surprise, our economy is service-led. So we also need to make sure that through this partnership, that we're voicing and ensuring that those new trade agreements are kind of reflecting what we needed as a region. So yeah, I think it's an exciting, and I think it's more about ensuring that the whole service provision is we minimize any duplications and maximize the stakeholders' capabilities in a much better way.
Okay, thank you for that. Anybody got any questions for any of our panelists? Gentlemen at the front, and Greg, just tell me where you're from.
Hi, morning. I'm Joe from SLG Agency. Question for Chris. You kind of touched on it before, maybe with the awareness in the room for TPU as an example. But when it comes to public perception for things like infrastructure projects and things like that, what sort of plans maybe do you have in the coming years for trying to boost the positive awareness of these things? Because, like you mentioned, in terms of for a lot of us maybe involved in the infrastructure world, we understand when we see disruptions or we see work going on, maybe that doesn't frustrate us as much because maybe we're aware of what the reasons are, but maybe the wider public don't quite get that, and public perception of major projects can send it in a bit of a spiral. So in terms of maybe what worked for yourselves, but wider examples of how that can work, and also then in terms of attracting a new skilled workforce as well, on that. I'd be interested to know what would be the
Yeah. Really good question. So I think firstly about awareness. Well, so I sit on the Transparent Repair Program Board, an enterprise approach, lots of parts involved. It's probably a model of how any repair insurers could work. We do have responsibility for marketing in Transparent Express. So also when I ask business groups like this and they say, how aware are you of it? People have put their hand up, it makes me a little bit disturbing. So I think we do need to kind of dial up what we do. We do have brand awareness metrics. In terms of what they are off the top of my head now, but I know the brand awareness is always going up. We've had big campaigns, yes, the financial pressures on those campaigns last year, but it does sound to me as though we need to do much more, particularly around brand TLU and its awareness. We do track customer sentiment in particular, but also brands, but it sounds like, as I say, we need to do more. In terms of skills, I mean, Transparent Repair Program, I'll speak about that. It's doing some great work with apprenticeships. Hundreds of apprenticeships from source lots of commitments from the program to source a lot of construction work from local companies as well. So I think much more that we can do. But you know, I read some interesting stats earlier this week. The average age. What's the average age for your workplace? Yeah, so the average age of relevance is 44.1, and we do have a big barrel of really skilled people who will be retiring very, very soon. That's a big problem for us. And we're facing it's about how we've got the available skills academy that are working on. But of course, what's happened, one reason why the lower costs go up so much is that we just accepted that. There's been no, smooth pipeline of work. It's all been peaks and troughs. The rail industry, I know we've got representatives from engineering in the room today, we're just facing the significant issues of our rate of retirement without the skill set that's coming through. It's big problem for us in the industry. In fact, that's what we've got in London later on Saturday. That's one of the things that I'm talking about with counterparts in everywhere. Skills is a big issue, as I'm sure it will be for many industries as well. Hopefully that answers your question.
Thank you. Graham Dixon from S3 Warehousing. Firstly, TP, quick double-headed for me. TP, when you launched your first class service a few months ago, you kind of invited people from the chamber to go on a run to Carlisle. Chamber really kind of asked me to do it. I've got to say, it's fantastic. For the first class, the food was amazing compared to other networks. So I can't fault it. You really did get that right. So well done there. So no question for you. Sorry to wake up. Just going to note a slight bit of positive sentiment that there is in that presentation. Out of interest, did QES4 launch before the budget? And if it did, was there a change in sentiment before and after?
Good question. No, we didn't launch before the budget. It launched, I think, on the 4th of November, Monday. So it was just after. There was a bit of a slowdown in responses coming towards the end of November. Well, what I did see is that the responses that came in December were slightly more positive than the responses that came in November.
Okay, anybody else? Any questions? We're going to get stepped in today.
Hi, Sharon Snell from First Commercial Recruitment. I actually work in engineering and manufacturing recruitment and have done for 30 years, so I can totally get what you're saying about skills. My question is for Susanna, because there's been a lot of talk over the last few weeks and few months about trade agreements with the EU and simplifying things for businesses. And Subra, you're right, I was reading that FT article this morning or yesterday. But the reality is, do you think that is good for trade? Because what they're talking about is basically providing an easy route for SME businesses, because the larger organisations, quite rightly, are able to cope with red tape, but providing a simplified route to trade between Europe without the benefits of being in the European Union. And that kind of worries me a little bit, and the figures aren't as bad as what we expected they were going to be in terms of our exports. So what are your thoughts on that?
I think it's a bit of a big mixed bag in there, because yes, obviously anything that can simplify trade, I mean, in principle, yeah, why wouldn't we consider it? But the also reality is it's never gonna compare to what we have. It's not gonna be, you know, being in the Pingonium. It's not gonna completely remove any customs related processes or procedures. So, and we are seeing it already with Northern Ireland and the Windsor framework. Apparently, I mean, in theory, new simplified processes are coming into place, but with those simplified processes are coming also a couple of schemes that companies need to apply for, so it's kind of yes and no. Kind of, yes, it's simplified maybe in the long term, but in the short period, companies have to put a lot of effort in complying with that simplification process. So I'm a bit skeptical of what it could mean and whether it's really what we wanted when we set up with Brexit or what whoever thought Brexit you know, was going to give us the boost. And now with export growth, let's be clear, export growth has been driven by services primarily. Export of goods has really declined for us, especially to the EU. And a few scholars have said that we have to look at export growth services with a bit of pinch of salt. Why? Because it has meant that a lot of the UK companies have decided to sell through affiliates. And they give the example of Shell, for example, where a huge growth in exports in Luxembourg. But is it really? It meant that some of those factories, production has moved to Europe, even if we are still invoicing from the UK and seeing as a service. So it has pros and cons in there, but yeah, I'm not sure if I answered the question, but I think it's basically, we can look for simplified processes, but I don't think it will resemble what we had.
Hi, I have to write this down to make sure I actually ask it right. So I'm Nicole, and I'm the workplace sleep coach. Well, I am the workplace sleep coach, should I say. And this is to Chris. So with there been a push to do with what you're saying about the skill shortage, with there been a push to create family-friendly workplaces that offer flexible working to help manage childcare, obviously we're trying to help close the gender career gap as well. With regards to things like the engineering industry in general, it's not exactly the most family-friendly kind of career options, is it? But obviously that's one of the things now that the younger generation are looking at when they're looking at their careers. Have you got a plan to actually make it so that industry can be more flexible and family-friendly, especially for getting more women into the workplace as well?
Well, what a great question. Yeah, the railway industry, sadly, is not known for its diversity as it stands at the moment. So just to give you an illustration, we actually benchmark well, something that I've really been passionate about in TPE. The female representation of the workforce, TPE is 24%. Yeah, and that's good for a railway operator, which is sad, isn't it, really? So we obviously make commitments to really diversify that, and that's driven actually because most of my train drivers, so which was 620, are male and white. So of course we're doing a lot to really try and recruit to make sure that our workforce represents the communities that we serve, and we've got that right gender balance. And I think the only way that we can do that is by really pushing what we can do from a flexible working perspective. It does require, and also family-friendly, it does require support of trade unions, and trade unions, yes, they do support it. It does need to, that support does need to be translated into actions, because the way that 24/7 shift-based work is applied, we'll have to think about radical things like part-time train drivers, part-time conductors, which of course is a little bit off-centre from what has been the railway. Absolutely, and do you know what, we're already doing that, particularly for office-based colleagues, definitely, we're doing that already, and that's why certainly within our senior leadership function, we've got a much better representation. It's around about 39% female in the senior leadership cohort, which I think is really, really important. So we're doing family-friendly things like that. We need to do much more, particularly to attract that diversity where it's needed in frontline roles, like signalling, driving, revenue protection, those sorts of things. It's firmly on our radar, and of course, we're just toying now with how the new regulations in relation to flexi working apply to shift work in this way. We've got more rigid and fixed shift patterns given the nature of how trade service operates in the concept.
That's another thing that's time for two more. Do them both together. Or... Go on.
Thanks, Chris. I'm Emerald Chris. I'm the regional director of the Institution of Civil Engineers. And just to put a little bit of context on what Chris just said in terms of the proportion of women that he has in TPE, in engineering, the whole sector, it's sort of around 13% women. So actually the rail industry, or certainly TPE, are doing a really good job on that. It's increasing, and particularly amongst younger engineers, but we do have a real issue with women leading in engineering, and we're doing a lot to try and support that. And I think there's a lot that it can be done around recruitment. I think retention is a really critical part of that. And so what you're saying about family friendly is as important as promoting diversity and inclusion. Yeah, so I'm not here as Chris's cheerleader, but actually TP are doing a pretty good job against an industry where there is a lot of entrenched behaviour and feeling.
Thanks, Emma. Sharon, you've got down and the final question. The last GBS presentation.
Oh, the question. Better change the question. Well, just to add to Emma's and Nicole's and Chris's comments, what I can say is we've got an ageing population in the UK. There's no avoiding that. And in terms of that flexibility, a lot of businesses, what they're looking to do is they don't want this mass exodus of skill because we've got a huge skill shortage across the UK. And what they're doing is they're using, rather than taking retirement, they're offering their skilled people part-time opportunities, and they're having to do that as the norm now as opposed to the exception. And I think if you do that, you're likely to keep a few more of your staff. My question is really to Supra, because I read this morning that the ONS has said that their data isn't going to be accurate until 2027. I think it comes to the labour market survey and the likes. And I just wondered, as an economist, how does that impact you in trying to work out where we fare across GM in comparison to the UK? And how are you going to compare moving forward if really what we've got is skewed figures for quite a long time?
Really good question. Particularly what is called the labour force survey has had some problems. Labour force survey is actually quite important because it's also tied into the annual population survey, just reading out names of service now. But that's what actually helps measure economic inactivity, etc. So it's actually quite important, right? There has been a decline in response rates for the ONS surveys since COVID. That's probably one of the main reasons that's actually affecting this. So they are trying to build it up. So there are some concerns about economic inactivity and the figures that we are working on. We have actually discussed this at the Greater Manchester Economic Resilience Group and another fora. So there are sometimes the difference could be like 3-4 percentage points, right? So there can be some decision-making errors. But actually, for me, the bigger risk is perhaps there are some groups which need to be targeted, whether it is for support on getting them back into the workforce or something, who may not necessarily get that type of support. That, I think, is one of the concerns that we have. But yes, for economic decision-making, it is a weakness, which is why I harp on response rates to service, and I know we get hammered by surveys every week, if not every day. But certainly the QES, you should fill it in, because the larger the response rate, the better my distinction.
Thanks, I think the other thing to say is the intelligence group in Greater Manchester, which consists of local authorities and a range of other people. As part of what we've been doing on the ABSIP as well, is there is now a Greater Manchester Labour Market Insights Unit as well, which is another fancy in LMIU. So that involves all the key people and all the key owners of data across Greater Manchester come together, so it's ourselves, Combined Authority, and growth of Midas, primarily around skills needs, but obviously you've got all sorts of other labour market information going into there as well. And our job is that insight bit, to interrogate it, and to be quite honest, the people responsible for some of the labour market data at the Combined Authority will give a caveat if they're not entirely convinced. Some of the stuff that's been coming out from ONS And let's be honest, it's not been 100% accurate for a long time now. They will caveat it with this looks odd. When you start to get labour market data and you get the straight lines, quarter on quarter, that's not quite right. So there's something fundamentally wrong there, and government will go to it. But yeah, it's not very positive. Yeah. So anyway, that's one thing. So we've come to the end of it. Just like if we could just share our appreciation, please, for. Especially like today, thanks Banana Express for supporting today's event and being very honest as well with your answers and letting us know what's off your wish list as well. So that's always good. Well, thank you for attending as well. It's great to see so many of you here. There's always a risk at this time of it because you walk to or whatever. To have a room full like this is absolutely brilliant. Thank you for your questions, for your input. You will get copies of the slides and information from today. But please tell other people that aren't in the room about why they should actually be here and also why they should fill out the report economic survey. What we do with that is becoming increasingly important. And like I said, you know, if you want to be somewhere in the country that sounds better than even the chances of getting through the next few years in a good state, you're in the right place here in Greater Manchester. Just a couple of things. We are going to be writing to the Chancellor in January, just outlining some concerns that we're hearing from some of our members around the national insurance rise and one thing or another. If you want to take part in that, you'll need names, it's all confidential, because obviously we're talking there about K and one thing and another. But please email in, let me have some sort of ideas. We've already, some people in the room today that have already done that. Some of the numbers that we're looking at are completely eye-watering. I think it's important that we put that point across to government about the impact some of that will have. If there are our local presidents in the room, we're going to be meeting at 10:30, the local presidents forum, down in Tony Wilson, so even though if that is something that impacts you. But finally, all that remains for me to say is thank you once again for coming. Have a fantastic Christmas and all the best for the new year. We will be doing it all again in March, I think, Subrahmaniam, yeah. So who knows what those numbers will be looking like then. But thank you once again. Thank you for your support this year. And have a safe journey back. And like I said, have a great break over Christmas and New Year. Thank you.